Something inside you has already begun releasing the need to prove, though the conscious mind still fights this letting go. You may not recognize it yet in the daylight hours, when the world makes its demands and the old patterns rise automatically. But in the quiet moments, when defensiveness fails to appear where it once lived, when silence feels natural rather than dangerous, something fundamental has shifted in the psyche. This is not weakness entering your life. This is power, authentic and undeniable, emerging from depths you have not yet fully explored. The mind interprets this release as loss. It believes you are giving up, surrendering some essential territory in the endless war for recognition. But what the unconscious knows, and what the ego resists understanding, is that the war itself was the prison. Every battle fought for validation, every argument mounted in self-defense, every performance staged to prove your worth. These were not expressions of strength, but symptoms of a profound internal fracture. You have been trying to convince others of a truth you did not fully believe yourself, and this exhausting theater of proof has been draining the very power you sought to demonstrate. According to my research into the individuation process, the cessation of proving is not defeat, but the beginning of genuine psychological strength. Through years of studying the unconscious, one pattern emerged with unmistakable clarity. Those who carry authentic power rarely announce it, rarely defend it, rarely perform it for an audience. The psyche operates according to principles that contradict everything the ego has been taught about strength. What presents itself as confidence in the outer world is often compensation for inner doubt. What appears as humility may conceal the deepest self-possession. The persona, that mask we wear to meet the world's expectations, grows larger and more elaborate in proportion to the distance between our authentic self and our conscious identity. You feel it, do you not? That strange fatigue that comes not from physical exertion, but from the constant maintenance of an image. The exhaustion of remembering who you claim to be, of defending positions you no longer fully inhabit, of justifying choices to people whose opinions carry weight only because you granted it to them. This tiredness is not a symptom of your weakness, it is the psyche's way of announcing that a fundamental shift has become necessary. What I discovered through decades of analytical work is that the need to prove oneself operates as a kind of psychological compensation. The ego, uncertain of its own ground, seeks constant external confirmation of its worth. It believes that if enough people validate its existence, its competence, its value, then perhaps the internal doubt will finally be silenced. But the unconscious knows what the ego refuses to accept. External validation cannot heal an internal wound. The more desperately you seek proof of your worth from others, the more evidence you provide, to yourself, that you do not truly possess what you claim to have. This is only the surface. Beneath lies something far more disturbing. What the psyche reveals through this withdrawal is disturbing. Most of what you called confidence was actually fear wearing a mask. The bravado, the achievements displayed, the constant demonstration of capability, these were not expressions of genuine self-assurance, but elaborate defenses against the terror of being seen as inadequate. Depth psychology reveals that the ego constructs its persona not from strength, but from whatever it fears it lacks. The person who endlessly proves their intelligence secretly fears they are stupid. The one who constantly demonstrates their competence harbors deep doubts about their capability. The mask always reveals to those who know how to read it precisely what lies beneath. But here is where it becomes strange, where the psyche's intelligence reveals itself in unexpected ways. The moment you stop proving, the instant you withdraw energy from this exhausting performance, something emerges that was impossible to access while the proving continued. A presence, a stillness, a quality of being that requires no announcement, no defense, no external confirmation. This is what I came to understand as authentic power, and it operates according to principles entirely foreign to the ego's understanding. The first sign reveals itself in the disappearance of defensive reactions. Where once criticism triggered immediate justification, where disagreement demanded elaborate argument, where questioning provoked defensive explanation, now there is only stillness. The psyche has ceased its automatic protection of the persona because the persona itself has begun to dissolve. What remains is something far more stable, far less vulnerable to the opinions and judgments of others. You notice this shift perhaps in a conversation where someone challenges your competence, your choices, your worth, and instead of the familiar surge of defensive energy, you feel only a mild curiosity about their perception, coupled with an unshakable knowing that their opinion cannot touch what is true. This is not indifference, though it may appear so to those still trapped in the proving game. Nor is it the false superiority of one who claims to be above the need for validation while secretly craving it. What emerges from analytical work is a pattern. Genuine self-possession creates a kind of psychological impermeability. Not because you have built thicker walls, but because you have stopped identifying your worth with others' perceptions of it. The self, that center of the personality that transcends ego, simply is. It requires no proof because it does not doubt itself. It needs no defense because it recognizes attacks on the persona as irrelevant to its essential nature. Consider the ancient oak. It does not prove its strength to the wind. When storms come, it bends or it stands, but it does not argue with the weather about its right to exist. It does not send its roots deeper in order to convince the soil of its worth. Its power is inherent, self-contained, requiring no external confirmation. You are becoming like this oak. The desperate reaching for validation, the constant adjustment of your branches to catch more light from others' approval, this is ending. What replaces it is a rootedness so deep that surface storms become increasingly irrelevant. Second, there is a transformation in the quality of your silence. What was once fearful reticence, the terror of being unknown, unseen, unvalidated, becomes strategic presence. The unconscious, as I came to understand through years of clinical observation, communicates most powerfully through what it withholds. The person who must fill every silence with proof of their worth, who cannot allow mystery to surround them, who explains and justifies and demonstrates without pause, this person has not yet learned the power of the unspoken. You may have noticed this shift already. Situations that once demanded your voice, your explanation, your self-justification, now you simply observe. Someone makes an assumption about you, incorrect but harmless, and instead of correcting their misperception, you allow it to exist. Not from cowardice, not from people-pleasing, but from a deeper understanding that your truth does not require their acknowledgement to remain true. A colleague questions your methods, and rather than mounting an elaborate defense, you offer only silence and continued competence. The results will speak or they will not. Either way, your worth remains unchanged. Through the lens of depth psychology, this represents a profound shift in the relationship between ego and self. The ego, in its immature state, believes it must constantly announce itself, must make its presence and value known through endless articulation. But the self, that deeper organizing principle of the psyche, operates through a different logic entirely. It understands that true power whispers while weakness shouts, that authentic presence requires no proclamation, that the most profound truths often hide in silence. Third, what emerges is a curious liberation from the hypnotic power of others' opinions. This phenomenon appeared again and again in my analytical work. The person still seeking external validation remains in a kind of psychological slavery, dancing to rhythms set by the collective, performing roles assigned by others' expectations, measuring worth by standards they never chose. The opinions of parents, colleagues, society, even strangers, these carry extraordinary weight because the ego has not yet differentiated itself from the collective unconscious. It does not know where others' values end and its own begin. But something shifts when proving ceases. The opinions do not disappear. People continue to judge, to evaluate, to form perceptions. What changes is your relationship to these judgments. You hear criticism and recognize it as information about the critic's psychology, not definitive truth about your worth. You receive praise and appreciate it without becoming dependent on it, without needing it to shore up a fragile self-image. The collective's expectations still exist, but they no longer command your psyche with the same absolute authority. I recall a woman who came to me having spent decades in what she called the performance of competence. She was, by all external measures, extraordinarily successful. Accomplished in her field, respected by peers, sought after for her expertise. Yet she described a constant terror of being exposed as inadequate, a compulsive need to prove herself worthy of each new opportunity, an exhaustion from the endless demonstration of capability. In our work together, something unexpected emerged. As she began to withdraw energy from the proving, as she allowed herself to simply be competent without constantly demonstrating it, her actual effectiveness increased. Projects that once required elaborate justification and defensive explanation now moved forward smoothly because she had stopped arguing with imaginary critics. Relationships that had been contaminated by her need for validation became more authentic as she released others from the burden of constantly confirming her worth. What she discovered, and what the psyche reveals to all who undergo this transformation, is that the energy spent on proving is energy unavailable for actual being. The more desperately you demonstrate your worth, the less presence you have for genuine engagement with life. The proving itself becomes a kind of veil between you and direct experience, between you and authentic relationship, between you and your own power. Fourth, the mechanism by which performance anxiety dissolves reveals the persona's true function. The psyche operates through a principle of compensation. Whatever the conscious personality denies or fails to integrate gets relegated to the unconscious, where it gathers energy and eventually demands recognition. Performance anxiety is the shadow side of the proving compulsion. The more you insist you must constantly demonstrate your worth, the more the unconscious whispers that you are not actually worthy. The more elaborate your proofs, the louder the internal voice questioning their validity. When proving ceases, this compensatory mechanism loses its power. If your worth is not contingent on performance, then performance anxiety has nothing to feed on. You can engage in challenging work not to prove your capability, but simply because the work itself calls to you. You can risk failure because failure no longer threatens your fundamental worth. You can attempt what you do not yet know how to do because your value is not measured by constant success. What became clear through clinical observation is that authentic confidence, as opposed to the ego's defensive bravado, emerges only when the psyche releases its grip on external validation. The person who must prove themselves cannot truly grow because growth requires the humility to be incompetent, to not know, to fail and learn. But this humility becomes possible only when worth is established independent of performance. The self knows it has value inherent in its existence, not earned through achievement. And this knowing liberates the personality to engage with life from curiosity rather than fear, from genuine interest rather than desperate need for validation. Fifth, there is a shift from calculated impression management to authentic presence. The persona, according to my research, functions as a kind of interface between the individual and the collective. We all wear masks. This is not pathological in itself. The question is whether we know we are wearing them, whether we can remove them when appropriate, whether they serve our authentic development or obstruct it. When the need to prove dominates consciousness, the persona becomes rigid, inflexible, constantly maintained at great psychological cost. You who are undergoing this transformation may recognize a new flexibility in your self-presentation, where once you carefully curated every word, every gesture, every revelation to create a specific impression, now you simply speak from your actual experience. Where once you performed a version of yourself designed to elicit validation, now you inhabit your genuine complexity without apology. The contradiction, the uncertainty, the not knowing, these are no longer hidden behind a facade of false confidence, but acknowledged as part of your authentic human experience. The archetypal forces at work here operate according to ancient patterns. The hero's journey always includes a moment when the weapons must be laid down, when the armor must be removed, when strength must be found not in defenses but in vulnerability to truth. This is not weakness. This is the courage to meet life without the constant mediation of a protective persona, without the exhausting maintenance of an image designed to prove worth to others. Sixth, the compulsion to justify your decisions vanishes when the psyche achieves internal authority. Individuation requires that you develop what I called psychological independence. The capacity to make choices based on your own values, your own sense of truth, your own encounter with the self, rather than constantly seeking permission and validation from external authorities. But this independence cannot be achieved while you remain enslaved to the need to prove your choices correct to others. Perhaps you have noticed this liberation already. A decision forms inside you, clear and undeniable, emerging from depths you cannot fully articulate. In the past, you would have constructed elaborate justifications, prepared defenses against anticipated criticism, sought validation from others before trusting your own knowing. Now, you simply decide, you act. You allow the decision to unfold into consequence without needing others to confirm it was correct. The internal authority has become stronger than the external judgment. What the unconscious shows us through this shift is that true power resides in self-trust, not the ego's arrogant certainty that it knows best, but the self's quiet confidence in its own capacity to navigate life's complexity. You will make mistakes. The psyche knows this and does not fear it. You will choose wrongly at times. This too is part of the individuation process. But the quality of your engagement with life transforms when choices arise from authentic internal authority rather than desperate need for external approval. The seventh sign manifests when natural influence emerges without effort, when the integrated self operates from wholeness rather than lack. This is perhaps the most paradoxical aspect of the transformation. The person who desperately tries to influence others, who performs and proves and demonstrates in order to gain power over others' opinions and actions, this person rarely achieves genuine influence. Their desperation communicates itself beneath the words, triggering resistance rather than receptivity. But the person who has stopped proving, who rests in authentic self-possession, this person influences without trying, impacts without effort, draws others naturally through the simple fact of their presence. From the perspective of individuation, this occurs because wholeness itself is attractive. The psyche recognizes completion when it encounters it, even if the conscious mind cannot name what it senses. When you stop fragmenting your energy through constant proving, when you gather yourself into integrated presence, people feel this. They may not understand what they are responding to, but they are drawn to the stillness, the groundedness, the quality of being that requires no announcement or defense. Your words carry more weight now, though you speak less. Your actions create more impact, though you perform less. Your presence generates more response, though you try less to impress. This is not magic. This is the simple psychological principle that authentic power, power that arises from the integrated self rather than the desperate ego, operates according to different laws than the power you once sought to prove. When you pause and observe this transformation, when you notice how far you have traveled from the exhausting performance that once defined your days, perhaps you feel a kind of grief. There is loss in this letting go. The persona you maintain, but for so long, the proving that gave structure to your efforts, the external validation that once seemed essential, these are being surrendered. And surrender, even when it leads to liberation, carries the flavor of death. Something must die for something else to be born. But what is dying is not your power. It is only the false image of power, the ego's desperate compensation for felt inadequacy. What is being born is something far more substantial, far more enduring. The self, emerging from behind the persona's elaborate theater, revealing a kind of strength that needs no proof because it simply is. The shift from proving to being represents the most fundamental transformation in psychological development. It marks the transition from ego dominance to self-realization, from persona identification to authentic individuation. This is not a smooth journey. The ego resists this death with everything it has. It will attempt to reclaim the old patterns, to seduce you back into the proving game with promises that just one more validation, just one more proof, will finally bring the security you seek. But you who have tasted authentic presence know these promises are lies. What depth psychology teaches, and what your own experience now confirms, is that real power operates in silence. It moves through stillness. It influences through presence rather than performance. The oak does not prove its strength to the wind. The mountain does not justify its existence to the valley. The ocean does not demonstrate its depth to the shore. They simply are, complete, whole, requiring no external confirmation of their nature. You are becoming like this. The compulsive need to announce yourself, to defend yourself, to prove yourself worthy of the space you occupy, this is dissolving. What replaces it is not passivity or weakness, but a kind of power so fundamental, so deeply rooted, that it needs no expression to be real. Your presence itself becomes the proof, though proof is no longer what you seek. When criticism comes now, you meet it with curious attention rather than defensive reaction. When praise arrives, you receive it with gratitude, but without the desperate hunger that once accompanied such validation. When opportunities appear, you evaluate them based on authentic resonance rather than on how successfully they might prove your worth to others. The external world continues its chaos and judgment and opinion, but you have withdrawn your identification from this theater of proof. Consider what becomes possible when this energy is freed. All the psychological resources once consumed by proving, the constant vigilance, the defensive preparation, the performance maintenance, the anxious monitoring of others' perceptions, all of this becomes available for actual engagement with life. For creative work undertaken because it calls to you, not because it might validate you. For relationships entered into for genuine connection, not for the confirmation they might provide. For challenges attempted from authentic interest, not from desperate need to, or demonstrate capability. The psyche has its own intelligence, operating beneath awareness. It knows that the proving was never about others, never about external validation, but about your own failure to recognize your inherent worth. Every argument you mounted in self-defense was actually an argument with yourself, an attempt to convince your own unconscious of a truth it questioned. Every performance staged for others' approval was actually a performance for your own internal critic, desperately trying to silence the voice that whispered you were not enough. But here is what the unconscious reveals to those who stop proving long enough to listen. You were always enough. Not because you achieved or performed or demonstrated worth, but because worth is not something earned through proof. It is inherent in existence itself. The self does not need to prove its value any more than a tree needs to prove its right to grow or a river needs to justify its flow. Being itself is the only proof required. You who have ceased the endless performance now stand at the threshold of authentic power. Behind you lies the exhausting theater of proof, the defensive reactions, the compulsive justifications, the endless demonstrations of worth to an audience whose approval you no longer require. Before you stretches a different kind of life, one in which your energy flows into genuine engagement rather than constant validation seeking, one in which presence replaces performance, one in which your power emerges from being rather than proving. This is not the end of challenge or growth. You will still face criticism, still encounter doubt, still navigate situations that test your resolve, but you will meet these challenges from a different ground, from a centeredness that external circumstances cannot shake. The opinions of others will inform but not determine your path. The judgments of the collective will be noted but not obeyed automatically. Your choices will arise from authentic internal authority rather than desperate need for external approval. The transformation is not complete. Individuation is a lifelong process, not a destination reached and then finished. But something fundamental has shifted. You have discovered that your worth does not depend on constant proof, that your power does not require announcement or defense, that your authentic presence carries more influence than any performance ever could. This knowing, this bone-deep certainty that emerges when proving ceases, changes everything. Walk forward then, into this life that no longer demands you prove your right to occupy it. Speak when genuine expression calls, stay silent when silence serves truth. Engage where authentic interest draws you, withdraw where only performance would be required. Let your presence be your proof, knowing that proof itself is no longer what you seek. The power you once tried so desperately to demonstrate has emerged naturally, effortlessly, from the simple fact of your authentic being. You are complete. Not because you have proven yourself, but because you have stopped believing proof was ever necessary.